Andrew, what is the most expensive lesson that you have learned in your career?
You never lose money through overpaying for a business. You only lose money when you get the business model wrong. The other area of main mistakes is people. And when somebody's back is against the wall, then you start to realize, okay, this is who this person truly is. In a world where the service you deliver is commoditized, what's the differentiation? It's people.
Andrew, welcome. It's a great pleasure to speak to you. I don't know if we've ever told you the story about the first time we met you up in Johannesburg. It was terrorizing for us. And the reason being is that we had started to dip capital's toe into the world of private equity in South Africa, and your name came up all the time. I mean, it was astonishing. Have you spoken to Andrew Aitken? Have you met him? I know him. You should meet him. And I think your reputation as a formidable investor in the South African scene, clearly precedes you. As a senior partner at RMB Ventures, and you've spent your career, or a large part of it, working in private equity, originating, managing and exiting investments kind of across Africa. You've worked with businesses that are very high value and high growing, from Tracker to Amsol to Net Healthcare. What really stands out for us is this unbridled kind of contagious passion that you have for business, and this amazing curiosity and fascination that you have for what makes them tick, their very unique cultures, the forces, tailwinds, headwinds that shape them and force them to adapt. And then mostly what stands out to us, I think, is this passion that you very clearly have for the empowerment and development and growth of the people inside those businesses who are driving them and building them and growing them. So yeah, it's a great pleasure to speak to you, and there are many reasons why everyone knows your name in this space. So before we get into the art of investing, why private equity? What drew you to it, and what keeps you here all these many years later?
Okay, so now I'm intimidated because so many nice things that you said there, which my wife will tell you that none of them are true. To be frank, until I was probably 25, 26, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I wasn't a particularly industrious student, and I guess my career was a journey. And certainly in the early years, I didn't pay too much attention. I think you mentioned it, I was always very curious about business, and about, more specifically, individual businesses and what makes them tick. One of the abilities I have, I guess, is this concept of being able to hold opposing views and multiple views in my head. And business and investing specifically is so much about that, because we are taking views about the future, and there is no right and wrong. And there are so many factors that come into play when trying to figure out whether a business is not just a good business model, but is it investable as well. And I love that. And it was a way for me. I've always been a bit of a jack of all trades and never a master. But it was a great way for me to express and, I suppose, do the things that I love doing. And what it's done is give me, I realized, and I borrow this term from a sort of friend and ex-boss of mine, Alan Pullinger, and he said, what we understand is the language of business, and that's what we do. So all these facets that come into play, we understand, and the more you experience is absolutely crucial in terms of what we do. And the more experience you have, and the more you dip into different businesses, etc., the more you realize what you need to look for in a decent investment. So that's really that was part of it. I guess the other thing was the people. So I've always loved interacting with people, and it's less than networking. I don't like the sort of forced or staged interactions. Like this one's really hard, like we mentioned before we started. But I love, again, everyone is individual, and when you see the passion come out with a lot of the entrepreneurs and founders that we deal with, it's infectious. So we get very sucked into that, and we get very invested personally in these businesses, and that for me was great. And the people element is to study anthropology, really, and you can, as we all know, you can always keep learning.
What did you study?
So my dad is a doctor,
Yeah.
and I wanted to do medicine. And he said, no, not a good idea at this point in time. And being young and wet behind the ears, I said, okay, cool, what should I do? And he said, oh, no idea. So he said, we'll go and do something general. So I went and I did a BCom, and then eventually ended up following the herd and doing a CA, and eventually got a CFA as well, sort of, I think, 3 or 4 years after that. So probably my late 20s or so.
Andrew, did you study any, or I suppose you've developed this amazing curiosity in people, and it's core and central to understanding whether something is investable or not. The study of anthropology, of psychology, and things like that, is that sort of something you've learned in a more informal context?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, the University of Life, just through multiple interactions. And I think, I'm so much wiser and more in tune and aware of who people are. And, through my journey, certainly through the sort of 8 or 9 years that I headed the business, we leaned in a lot more to trying and to understand that aspect of it more. Culture, people, what brings the best out of people, but it starts with knowing yourself. So a lot of that journey started with just understanding who I was. And wow, once you start to understand who you are, then you start realizing, okay, what triggers me? What's the center of who I am? What does my value system look like? And then you realize the mistakes you make later in business are often related to somebody else's value system is not the same as mine, and they've triggered me. Or even more so, the institution. The institution has got a value system that we subscribe to, and you have to do business with people that have a similar value system. And there's lots of room for individuality within that, but the value system has to be the same.
At the start of the year, I think it was, you handed the baton to Amina Pahad as head of ventures. What are you feeling excited about in respect of being back in the investment sector and space?
I'm going back to my roots. It's what I love doing. When you head the business, you can't be player and referee. So it wasn't possible for me to execute on a number of the opportunities that I originated, etc. And I missed that. And I'm now going back to doing what I really want to do. And the beautiful thing is, there's no, even though I'm a senior partner, I'm no longer head of the business, but when we go into an IC discussion or with my colleagues around the table, everybody has a right to express a view. And no one can turn around to the other one and say, okay, your view is wrong, because we're taking views on the future. And so I love that sort of interaction. So that I am enjoying, and I will never stop investing. It's one of my passions. And, my dad is my hero. He did his last day of work in February this year, and he turned 82 last year. And if I can do the same, I will love that. So I've got lots of energy left, and really excited about getting back to the coalface, etc. Hopefully I'll add value. We'll see. I'm very aware that I have a new boss, and she will let me know in certain terms if I'm not.
Andrew, what is the most expensive lesson that you have learned in your career? And when I say expensive, that might be financial, personal, deep toll on self.
So we've made mistakes. There's no doubt, and I guess so. What it boils down to is, I think there's always this, when you're investing, I think it's okay if there's an unknown known. So if there's views that you need to take which say, look, we know this is a risk. Let's evaluate this risk. Okay, on balance, are we happy? Okay. I think the mistake that people make, and we've made this mistake before, is where you don't do enough diligence and you don't do your homework, and now suddenly there are unknown unknowns. And that's when you get into trouble. So doing your homework, being curious, asking the right questions, make sure you understand, etc. I think it's a crucial thing, and we've made mistakes there in the past where there have been unknown unknowns which we should have known, because then you can't evaluate them. So I think it's it's absolutely fine to say, we know there's a risk here. Let's think about this risk. Let's take a view based on what it is. But when those things aren't there, when you don't know what they are, okay, then it's, and there will always be some unknown unknowns like COVID that'll pop up, and that is what it is. I think where the other place we've made mistakes, or the other area we made mistakes, is people. So so what I've learned, and through some bitter experience, is when everything's going swimmingly, there's never an issue. And those value systems are they're only brought into play when things go wrong. And when somebody's back is against the wall, then you start to realize, okay, this is who this person truly is. And when they go into that fight mode and defensive mode, and they become very, what's the right word, self-centered, etc., that's when the value systems matter, right? And I think we've made mistakes there, where we back people that we thought their value system was fine, and actually at the end of the day it wasn't. And when things went wrong, we lost money.
Yeah.
And I think those are crucial lessons.
How do you make that assessment of someone? What are you looking for?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a great question, and again, you never stop learning there, because it's human behavior. So I think I inherently tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. And take them at face value. What I've learned to do over time is consistently to sense check that against circumstance, against what is their objective here. And I think what I try and do is, first meeting is typically always a bit of a sense of background. I think context is so important in life. So, and the context is background, where have they come from, have they battled, has it been easy, what does their current dynamic look like. I will definitely look at, what cars do they drive, how long have they been in a particular role, just to get a feel for the character. And then I think everything after that is, every single interaction after that is testing. And it's like, okay, does this still resonate? And I think that, so there's a couple of things. So firstly, the cross-referencing and triangulation is super important. And I think the second thing is to be very mindful of our own biases. So, I mean, we bring in confirmation bias. We're community creatures. We tend to like people that are like us. And it's not a bad thing, it just is. But it doesn't necessarily, you need to be aware of those biases, because that's not necessarily what you're looking for in a partner. Value system, I think if you can weave in a question around, sure, like things must have been tough for you guys through COVID, what happened with your staff? How did people treat their staff? So you can weave in a couple of questions here and there.
Yeah, and I think there's something around conscious and unconscious gut feelings around people. I think inherently we are animals, surprise, and there's something about that intuition, that deep fundamental intuition. I mean, we can get into, Hours, absolutely. I was reading up about tangle teaser the other day. Do you know what a tangle teaser is?
I don't.
It's a little funny looking brush that you brush through your hair. You can brush it through wet hair and it doesn't scrunch up your hair. And the founder of Tangle Teaser came to Dragon's Den. I'm obsessed with Dragon's Den, and pitched this, revolutionary, odd-looking hairbrush. And of course they said, forget it, get out of here. And 14 years later, Bic bought Tangle Teaser for...
Oh, cool story.
Yeah. Well, here's the real cool part, for $210 million US.
Yeah, cool.
It was a really successful deal. And I often think about whether the dragons are sitting there sort of kicking themselves, like, sure, but it was right there. Yeah. So in your experience, have you passed on deals that still, wiggle up at night and annoy you?
I mean, the graveyard is littered with opportunity cost, right?
Yeah.
So no, there are a number of those deals that we've passed on. Some I guess for the right reasons at the time. Others probably not. I mean, hindsight is perfect. I mean, I think the lesson out of that is you're constantly trying to balance risk reward, and you need to do it within the context of your shareholder and whose money you're looking after. And I'll never forget, there was a gentleman when I started at RMB about 23, 24 years ago, and he used to say to me, Andrew, don't forget OPM. Like, what do you mean OPM? Other people's money. And when you're dealing with other people's money, your duty of care must escalate. One of the lessons that we learned, and I take this from Yuti, who's my dear old friend and colleague of 20 odd years, is, and he's right, and he always says, you never lose money through overpaying for a business. Okay, within context, if you overpay by double, you're going to lose money. But within reason, you never overpay if you pay another 10% or even 15% on a business. You only lose money when you get the business model wrong, or if you get the capital structure wrong, which is too much debt. So we've always had this view that we're happy to pay up a little bit, and even then we've lost out because some people will pay more, but you fund that with equity. You don't fund that with debt, and that way you sort of minimize the chance of getting into trouble. So yes, unfortunately, there was a lovely fintech business that we bid on about 3-4 years ago, and I think we lost out by about 5 or 10%, and it was recently sold. Oh, they must have made 3 or 4 times money in 3 or 4 years. It was annoying, to say the least. Yeah. We would have been having this interview somewhere on an island in the Bahamas. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to your point, hindsight is always crystal clear. In the world of startup, which is obviously fundamentally different from the world of private equity, there's always a conversation around, well, are you willing to put up the money yourself, Mr. Founder? You know, you've got this glittery business idea and you're asking me for money. Have you put money into it? And I think that's also a really wonderful test around
100%.
You know, are you willing to put some deep skin into the game?
Skin in the game, and that alignment is crucial.
Absolutely. Andrew, what has changed in the investment scene in South Africa since you started your career 20 or so years ago?
You sort of got to go back to, let's do a quick history lesson around private equity last 20 odd years. So I mean, I started mid 2000, so 2005, 2006. So, I mean, that era was contextualized by high GDP growth, real growth. Interest rates had come down from 20 odd percent. I'm old enough to remember what it was sort of like in those days, and was down sort of even late single digits, close to where we are today. And multiples for businesses was increasing all the time. So you had this trifecta, real tailwinds, trade winds, as we would call it in aviation, right? So, and I think that what that meant was most businesses in most industries got a boost, and it was a purple patch for private equity. It was easy to make money. You picked a good business model, or a reasonable business model, I should say, decent management team, and generally speaking, you were going to make money in 5 years. You know, then we went through a much darker patch during the 2010s where, you know, growth was sub 1%. Multiples weren't rising anymore because they'd got to the point where they needed to. Leverage was as freely available as it was late 2010s, but it wasn't more so. And it was much harder to make money in that sort of era. And I think that's continued. So I mean, we made a conscious decision sort of 8-9 years ago where, you know, you have to lean in more to your businesses. You've got to get more involved, and I think that's changed. Is I think you have to be much more intentional about value creation at a portfolio company level. I think the other thing is institutional memory. I get a sense there's not a lot of people left in the industry with 20 plus years experience anymore. You know, some of the very successful private equity firms, the bigger ones, have disappeared or morphed into different entities, and I think there's a lot of those that were there 20-30 years ago are no longer there. And you know, in our business, experience is everything. I mean, I still remember an example of, I think it was either Blackstone or KKR partner, and he was sitting on an investment committee and he had 35 years experience, and he knew they were looking at a particular investment, and he had 2 different iterations going back 20 years of that particular company and what had happened in its history, and they had a cultural issue at one point because they brought in a CEO who didn't fit, and for about 5-6 years they battled. You need to go back and check whether that cultural shift has changed. These are soft qualitative issues that are crucial, and those are, you know, talking about AI, those are sort of issues that AI will battle to understand. Right, but so I think that's changed. That sort of institutional memory has changed. You know, other than that, I think and then maybe deals have become a little bit more transactional, which is a pity in a way. My view is, the relationship stuff is still super important. We deal a lot with founders, and significant shareholders in the businesses, and that partnership approach and trust, and being able to sit down and have hard conversations, but from a good place with partners like that is super important. And I think that relationship stuff, in a way, has probably been eroded a little bit, but will, in my opinion, remain a crucial element of being a successful investor for a long time.
Andrew, what is a purple patch? What does that mean?
I don't know.
Okay, cool.
I don't think I chat GPT did, but a purple patch is a really good time to be in private equity. Yeah.
I thought purple, there would be a particular association with purple.
No, it's maybe it's royal. I actually can't remember.
Love it. Andrew, you've sat across from hundreds of businesses in your time and analysed them and analysed the teams behind them. What would you say great businesses have in common that, they share, apart from a very strong commercial case and a strong investment thesis?
Yeah, so great question. And again, I think this is evolution, but there are definitely traits that we see. So I'll caveat this by saying I've personally seen very few businesses that contain all of these traits, but by and large, a number of them they will contain, and they're pretty strong and passionate about they have certain elements, I guess. So let's talk about them. So I think the first thing is just when you walk into a business and you see passion and energy and commitment and drive towards a particular business, it's not just infectious, it's a super important part, even for ventures, there are a number of us senior partners who've been around for sort of 15, 20 years. We care deeply about our business and we love what we do. And, that phrase discretionary energy, we try and bring a lot of discretionary energy that people don't pay us for into the business. And I think when you see that in a business, it's very evident. And often it's the founder driven businesses, Bluff Meat Supply we've been involved in with Mark Bielowich and his team for a good decade or plus. You when you go there, you can see the care, you can see the energy and the passion, etc. So the other thing is leaders that focus on the system. I think generally speaking, and I'll make a general comment, which is always dangerous, but I think South African businesses in the past have been quite tactical. What does that mean? Very good at operations, very good at day-to-day, very good at solving immediate problems, not so strategic. And I think when leaders start thinking about not just strategy, long-term, what's happening 5-10 years out, and deliberately and intentionally giving themselves time to think about that, but also around the system. My business has been around for 30-40 years. The way we set up to solve our customers' problems and deliver a product or service now, is it still is it still fit for purpose for the new world that we live in? And that boiling frog syndrome, it can be very, very slow, and then suddenly it breaks, right? You don't want it to get to that point. So I think leaders that focus on the system and fixing the system and not sitting in the business. The other thing is those leaders and those businesses that know what they are. So they've spent time understanding what problems am I solving for my clients. And they're super good at explaining that, not just to us, but to the rest of their staff, even outside the business. And they're very consistent in their messaging around that. And they're just great at, so they can tell you exactly what they do, and they're completely committed to that. And you can ask them the same question in 4 different ways. They're driven by purpose. We like that as well. Understand what you understand what your purpose is, like why are you getting out of bed, etc. I think those businesses. But again, I haven't seen all of this in one business, but often when you get strong elements of some of those traits, and it's qualitative, right? A lot of these things are sort of qualitative as opposed to, the business model makes a huge difference. We know that, and I'm focusing a little bit more on this sort of the softer stuff, I guess.
Andrew, when we had lunch with you a little while ago, I remember you were talking about a sort of structural tailwind that was quite exciting to you around high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals just becoming more so as time goes on, sort of rich getting richer. And this was something you were interested in and sort of keeping a mind on, or an eye on at least. What other structural shifts or tailwinds are you seeing at the moment that maybe the broader market hasn't fully appreciated yet or taken note of?
I'm sure somebody, I always say that you are never the first person to come up with an idea. Somebody's always thought about it before. So these won't be new, but I mean, based on what I see, I think there's a couple of interesting trends. So I think the one is probably aging population. And what does that mean? Everything from aftercare, retirement homes,
Loneliness.
loneliness. Exactly, how do you create communities around that? So I think there's a trend there. I think there's some business models that will just always be resilient, right? Healthcare in general. Why? Because there's just demand, incessant demand. So tourism, quite like tourism. And I think there's a broader theme here, and it speaks to what you mentioned earlier about high net worth, etc. I think people want, especially in a post-COVID world, they want more time, they want more balance, work-life balance. They want to travel more, they want more experiences. So I think there's a broader trend there over the next 10, 20 years that I don't think weakens. And I think there's multiple opportunities that come out of that through various value chains if you look into that sort of mega trend. So, even AI, what is AI doing? It's making us more efficient. It's giving us more time. Forget the social problems that may bring, but I think we'll sort that out as a community and as civilization. But I think what it may well do is people have got more time. Maybe it's 4-day weeks. I don't know. Maybe it's less hours. And what are you going to do with that time? You need to get out. You need to have experiences. You need communities, people to do that with. So I think those are some of the trends we see, and that we sort of like. There's probably others, but that's probably enough for now.
I actually, after that lunch, had a conversation with a friend of mine who runs a super, super high end kind of boutique travel business. And I said to her, what are you seeing? And she said that hyper wealthy people are looking increasingly for extremely unique, once-off customized experiences. They are not interested in being on a tour bus and standing in front of the Taj Mahal for a snap and then, back on the bus and moving on. And she said that increasingly what she's seeing in her particular business is this need for, I want a hyper-authentic experience that other people are not going to get. And I want it to be very unique and meaningful as well. And she was going on a diatribe, which was very interesting, about how particularly wealthy people are searching for, this is a particular perspective, but meaning, and how travel enables them to have these experiences that no one else has that make them more interesting socially. It got terribly interesting very, very quickly.
I think it's a perfect example of another sort of mega trend, which is hyper personalization. And I think you see that in many different ways, right? So let's just take education. So why is there a handful of systems globally within a particular country to deal with countless different personality types, all with their own learning needs, pace of learning, style of learning? That hyper-personalization around teaching, I think, is a massive opportunity. Healthcare. And I think you're going to see that more and more, specific treatments for specific people based on your genetics, who you are, data, again, feeding data into AI. And I see massive opportunity there around this whole concept of hyper-personalization. In our own lives, we see it. No, I want my phone, I want one app, so some people want multiple apps. Some people want one app, and on that,
does it all.
one interface, and it must all tell me there. And somebody must give me a personalized news feed that gives me exactly what I want to see, not half of the rubbish that you get fed because
Yes.
it's just what happens. So I think that whole trend of hyper personalization has got a long way to run, and I think that's an interesting one to consider.
I was particularly interested in it in a travel context because this friend of mine's business is such that her recurring clients are about 45% of her client base. They keep coming back, but they don't want to go to the same place twice. They're like, bring me the weirdest, most wonderful place that I will not see a tour bus, and give that to me every 6 or so months. And I'll come
Exclusivity.
back. It's just so interesting. I think a question that I have is, how do you scale something like that? Because I think part of the appeal is that it doesn't have scale in the sense of
Yeah.
mass market. It's hyper differentiated. It's something only I
Yeah.
and the other 10 people on this tour.
So I think I don't think you do scale it, but that's okay. So, I mean, the concept of scale nowadays is a big buzzword, especially in the context of tech, right? We need eyeballs, we need users, we need annuity flow through subscription type business models. That's not the only way to make money, and it's not the only way to run a business. So I think something like that, what you would look to do is you charge for the experience. And typically, people that want those type of experiences can afford to pay for it. And I think there's a way where you can still deliver great returns to investors, etc. But you don't scale it in that way. But there are some good examples of where it has worked. So Hermes, for example, is a great example of where they wanted the authenticity of their product was so important, and they somehow found a way to train thousands of artisans across the world to conform to the same very high levels of standards, and they scaled something like that where it was still handmade. So I mean, there are ways of doing these things, and I think in the world of tech you probably find there are other creative ways, but it will I think a business model like that is challenging to scale. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I have to say it's been something that's really occupied my brain, and I've, thought about it from so many different angles of how does this thing grow, because she's got such a good thing going. And yeah. Andrew, let's shift into some lessons for South African management teams. Would you say at the moment that we are short on capital or really exceptional investable businesses in South Africa, or neither?
Yeah, so I think I don't think we're short of capital, and quite frankly, I think any decent investable business, you will always find an investor who's happy to make some money from that, right? So I don't think we're short of capital. Are we short of investable businesses? Yes, probably, but I think it's a function of we've got a small market, and scale is an issue. So I think I think that question is it's hard to calibrate. And I think, South Africa's got lots of great businesses. The opportunity for me is almost, and the problem is there've been a lot of failures from South African businesses trying to export their business models. But at the same time, I think there's still great opportunity there, and there are enough success cases, successful stories around South Africans taking their business models offshore. And I think that's probably where the opportunity lies.
What would you say some of the most common mistakes are that management make in the first year or so of taking on a private equity investment or bringing in private equity partners?
Good question, yeah. So firstly, I don't think it's necessarily mistakes that management makes. I think it's mistakes that we collectively make as shareholders, including management, but also ourselves. We have to take blame there. So I think, the investment processes are long, and they take a lot of energy, and management teams are often very fatigued by the end of it, and they're actually just like, can I just get back to my day job now? I don't want any more exciting conversations about blue sky thinking or full potential thinking and value creation. Can we just slow down?
Let me do my job.
Let me do my job. And I think that's the mistake we make is we slow down for too long. I think the other mistake we make is, we've had numerous examples of where management teams and founders have learnt a lot about their own businesses through our diligence and our process. And there's a lot of decisions that get taken around, hey, we need to change this. You're right, we're not strong here. We should be building this capability. And we forget about those. And we forget that those were good decisions, and those were problems worth solving, and those were decisions worth making. And I think that's another issue I find is we don't get around to some of that stuff we contracted for up front. And I think the third comment I would probably make is there are hard decisions that we all agree up front, and in the heat of the moment, because we want to get a deal done, we agree because there are hard decisions, and we procrastinate. And for the first 12 to 24 months, and sometimes even longer, we don't get around to making those hard decisions because they're hard. And I think that's something else we also probably need to take some blame on, holding people to account. And we contracted and we agreed to this. So.
Andrew, we saw you not long after you got back from China. And in fact, we've spoken to 2 CEOs who went to China with you and got to do the Shanghai tour and beyond. What made you do that? Why take management to China? What were you hoping they would get?
One of the things we've grappled with for a long time as Ventures is, what's our role? And some of the aspects of our role are easier to define, and we won't go into that. But some of the harder aspects are, how do we instill a growth mindset in our senior execs? And these are deeply experienced individuals who have been there, done there. They have multiple T-shirts,
in the stripes,
in the locker, and so it's not an easy thing to do. To always sort of convince them of a different path, and we don't even know the right path. So I think so. What the China experience is what we came to realization. We said, well, why don't we just show them different stuff? Start with the most obvious stuff, just technology progression, what they're doing with robotics, how they've leaned into that space, and some of the new ideas that come, because that's just super exciting to see.
For sure.
But the other stuff, which I found fascinating about China, which I really think we can learn from, long-term thinking, 30, 40, 50 years of planning, right? Central government and the ability for them to, using capitalist methodologies, right? So they talk about the mayor economy, incentivizing, giving the mayor at a particular city capitalistic tools. So you can use tax incentives, you can invest, you can provide soft loans. I mean, these are all capitalist tools, right? To achieve their strategy and to execute on their strategy. And I mean, I think so for me that combination of long-term planning, right incentive structures, and operationalizing so quickly in such a short space of time. I mean, we're talking decades for EVs, right? I mean, I just think there's so much for us to learn and take back from that. The other thing for me was, honestly, I think we, as South Africa generally, but even our businesses, we need to be leaning to the east. And we have to have partnerships and relationships with everyone globally, but certainly I don't think we pay enough attention to what's happening in China and India in particular. And I think we need to develop those relationships, and we need to lean in more. They are actively looking for partners in Africa. There's lots that we can provide to them, and we must in a balanced fashion. We must enter partnerships that are mutually beneficial. So I think that was the other idea, was just to get them closer, etc. But and that sort of multiplier effect around growth mindset, thinking differently about your business. I mean, we've always believed that there's something there, hard to measure, really hard to measure. And I mean, that was one of the debates we had for a while. It's like, we're going to spend this money and drag them out of their day jobs because we can't measure this benefit.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it comes back to that point of how do you inspire and teach people things that these are hard, seasoned veterans of various industries. I spoke to someone on buy side at Deutsche, very young woman who's just, oh man, just full of ambition and power, and she's just so cool. And I said, what is your perspective on the future of deal making in very much so a buy side context? And she said, the future of my industry is people. And she had really strong rationale for why she said that, particularly around being able to engage with very diverse sets of people in terms of management teams who are approaching an investor event and being able to empathize with them. A huge portion of what she spoke about was empathy, which I have to say I found quite surprising and really powerful.
It's an interesting observation, and I would agree with it because, and it probably resonates because in a world where the service you deliver, whether it's M&A or private equity, is commoditized, what's the differentiation? It's people and it's the relationship you build, and empathy is a big part of that.
Absolutely.
Do I get you? And ultimately, if I want you to partner with me, I have to give you a reason to partner with me.
For sure.
One of those is I get you.
Yeah.
So, boil it down to something very simple. I mean, you always want to be with people you like.
Absolutely.
You do business with people you like.
Absolutely.
Just like with your friends. I think it's human nature.
For sure. Andrew, in closing, a last question. When you look back on your career and going back to your earlier point about working for a very long time doing the thing that you love, what is something that you maybe already are really proud of in your career to date, and certainly something that you hold yourself to when you look back on your career one day? It's far from over, obviously, but what's something that you will feel really proud about?
So look, I'm super grateful and very humbled by what I've managed to achieve. I think I pinch myself. My wife reminds me of it. We talk about it often, like how privileged we've been just to. I mean, it's such a massive honor to work for RMB. I've never ever in my wildest dreams thought I would head up Ventures. I mean, that's a dream come true. So I think, I'm very. I guess I'm very proud of the fact that people gave me that opportunity, and whether I did a good or a bad job, I guess time will tell. But did I give 120%? I honestly did. And do I care? More than you'll ever know. And I think my team know that. And I think that caring about what you're doing is such an important thing. So I'm just super proud, I guess, of getting there. And what I would really, my strongest desire is in 10, 20 years time to look back at Ventures and say, wow, still great. And, hey, I wrote my chapter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, like I said right at the beginning, the amount of people who know you and talk about you, I have to say very favorably. You're already very much so well on your way to achieving that. Andrew, thank you for the time. It's really great to have you on that side of a microphone, so I'm not having to scribble down pearls of wisdom. And to our listeners and our watchers, until next time, thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire.
Cool. Thanks, Andrew.